Agradezco a todos quienes estén presentes o tengan la oportunidad de ver este webinar que hemos preparado y que cierra un ciclo financiado por la Corporación de Fomento de la Producción, una organización chilena que apoya, en este caso particular, la asociatividad entre empresas. Hemos, durante el año 2021, robustecido la asociación entre aquellas empresas que entregan servicios antárticos desde Punta Arenas y desde Puerto Williams. La estructura del webinar será la siguiente. Primero, un consultor, el doctor Antoine Guichard, hará una presentación de principalmente qué se necesita para construir una gateway, una puerta de entrada a la Antártica. Lo hará tomando como ejemplo la ciudad de Hobart, en la isla de Tasmania, en el estado de Tasmania, en Australia. Y se referirá a diferentes aspectos de lo que ocurrió allá durante los 80s y los 90, cuando Australia decide que Hobart concentre la actividad antártica de Australia y sea la puerta principal de entrada a ese continente. A continuación, yo haré una presentación de lo que creo son los desafíos de futuro que tiene la región de Magallanes y Antártica chilena. Y terminaremos con conversaciones y presentaciones de los principales clientes antárticos que tiene la región, en los aspectos de los logísticos, de la logística que necesitan los programas antárticos nacionales, y en los aspectos del turismo. Las actividades principales antárticas que se realizan a través de la región de Magallanes son turismo, logística, como ya dije, logística para la ciencia, de más de 20 programas antárticos nacionales, y también hay una actividad pesquera a la que no nos referiremos en este webinar, no en profundidad. Así que bienvenidos y damos inicio a este webinar que, como dije, terminará con una conversación entre dos representantes, uno de un programa antártico nacional y otro de una empresa de turismo, en este caso basada en Noruega, que mostrará lo que ha ido ocurriendo, lo que ellos han ido percibiendo que ocurre en particular en un tiempo de pandemia, con las facilidades que ofrece la ciudad de Punta Arenas y las ciudades de Punta Arenas y Puerto Williams. Gracias.
Hello everyone, hola. I'm going to talk to you today about building an Antarctic gateway using Hobart as a case study. So why Hobart as a case study? I lived 20 years in Hobart and was active in the development of the Antarctic gateway there from about 93 to 2010, during which I was both consultant, a part of the Tasman Polar Network, and the executive secretary of COMNAP, the association of all the 29 national Antarctic programs, including Chile. So, building an Antarctic gateway, you see here a little logo on the left. This is just a simple logo I put together for that talk, trying to feature basically an Antarctic gateway That's what you see in red and blue, supporting Antarctica, so that you can see both the Antarctic Gateway supporting Antarctica as a transit point to Antarctica with, from the bottom, you see several countries reaching the gateway, then going from there to various parts of Antarctica. And that little logo is supposed to represent DNA as well, so that you see the gateway being part of the Antarctic DNA and supporting its values. So, gateways. As most of you know, there are 5 main gateways to Antarctica. From west to east, Cape Town, Hobart in Tasmania, Australia, Christchurch in New Zealand, Punta Arenas in Chile, and Ushuaia in Argentina. So, what makes a true gateway? Some would see it just as a simple point of transit. And we are going to work on the assumption that you have 6 main criteria for a true gateway. 1, it's a point of transit. 2, it has a commitment to Antarctic values. 3, it has a connection with Antarctica. 4, it is part of a keystone of national strategy. 5, it is well coordinated locally. And 6, it has a global reach and reputation. So we are going to have a look at all of those 6 aspects through Hobart as a gateway. So case study, Hobart, it's a port facing Antarctica, but still a fair way to Antarctica. It's about 2,700 kilometers from Antarctica, much further than Punta Arenas is. But there is nothing in between, just the Southern Ocean. So it has rich historic links with Antarctica. Whaling was one of the key activities in Hobart initially in all the 19th century. Exploration with Furneaux and Cook, both stopping in Hobart as part of their circumnavigation of Antarctica. That's when they were looking for Antarctica. They never reached it, but they were trying to prove there was a continent south. Between 1839 and 1941, French Dumont d'Urville and Ross both stopped in Hobart as part of their expeditions where they actually reached the coast of Antarctica in East Antarctica. And in 1912, Amundsen came back to Hobart after its conquest of the South Pole, and it's from Hobart post office that he sent his telegram announcing to the world that he had reached the South Pole. Then a bit later, we had science and exploration with Australian polar explorer Mawson, Sir Douglas Mawson, in 1911 and in 1930-31, who came through Hobart for both of his expeditions, which were part science, part exploration. His second expedition being one of the bases for the Australian Antarctic claim on most of East Antarctica. Then, for 50 years, Hobart fell off the Antarctic map. You can see here the 3 main Australian Antarctic stations, Casey, Davis, and Mawson, and how they relate to Hobart, to Melbourne, and to Perth in Australia. From 1930 to 1980, basically all Antarctic activity out of Australia was conducted out of Melbourne, with the Australian Antarctic Division based in Melbourne and most expeditions leaving directly from Melbourne. And you can see from that map that there is not much difference. in distance if you need to do a round trip to the 3 stations, whether you start from Hobart, from Melbourne, or from Perth, doesn't make a very big difference. Which means that any of those 3 cities really could have been chosen as an Antarctic gateway. Perth and Melbourne are much larger cities, so they have larger ports and more facilities, so you could have thought they could have been chosen. But then came in the early 1980s a regional and a national strategy to make Hobart the Australian Antarctic gateway. So it was concerted, it was national, like in the federal government in Canberra, that decided to choose Hobart, the state of Tasmania and Hobart as a gateway. That was a strategy that, of course, was concerted with Tasmania, which was quite happy to become the gateway, but they couldn't have themselves chosen to be the gateway, since most government agencies involved in Antarctica are not Tasmanian agencies, they are national agencies funded by the central government. So, birth of a gateway, 1980 to the 1980s and 1990s. In 1981, the Australian Antarctic Division, which is the agency organizing all scientific expeditions to Antarctica, was moved from Melbourne to Hobart. In 1982, the headquarters of CAMALA, the Agreement for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, which is an international secretariat, was open in Hobart. The agreement had been signed in 1980 in Canberra with an agreement to set up the headquarters in Hobart. In 1984, Australia moved its main science marine laboratories to Hobart from a range of other cities in Australia. In 1988, the University of Tasmania opened the Institute of Antarctic Studies, which was mostly teaching with graduate diplomas and PhDs in Antarctic studies in various disciplines, and some research as well. In 1991, the Cooperative Research Centre for the Antarctic Environment was opened in Hobart, and that was a limited time, strong funding effort by at a national level to focus on the climate change with research in Antarctica. And in 1993, the Tasman Polar Network was established. We are going to talk about it later. It's a body that coordinates Hobart as a gateway. And it continues in the year 2000 and 2010s. 97 to 2001, Hobart was host of the COMNAP Secretariat, so the Secretariat of the Association of all the National Antarctic Programs. It has since moved to Christchurch, the Secretariat not being intended to be in the same place all the time. It might come to Punta Arenas one day. In 2008, ACAP Secretariat. ACAP is the Agreement on the Conservation of Albatrosses of Petrels. That's an international agreement to protect those birds in the Southern Ocean. In 2010, the University of Tasmania, in collaboration with the Australian Antarctic Division and a range of other research agencies, established the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies, which took over previous institutes like the Institute of Antarctic and Southern Ocean Studies and a few others, and expanded it. In 2001, the Southern Ocean Observing System, which is an international agreement to observe the Southern Ocean, was established in Hobart. And from 2014 to 2020, there was a strong national effort with considerable funding to help capacity building in Tasmania to try to raise the capabilities in a range of Antarctic science domains, and that was the Antarctic Gateway Partnership. So, as you can see, a lot of organizations have been established in the last 40 years, and most of them are still working. So Hobart now is a vibrant gateway with a range of research organizations, international organizations with meetings. It attracts a lot of different meetings from all over the world. It's a staging point for ships, aircraft, and a lot of expeditions. So some numbers. So these numbers are from a study conducted over the 2019-2020 season. And it was conducted looking both at the expenditure from the large organization who basically organize expedition or science, and the industry that provides some of those services. And it was cross-reference, which so that the things couldn't be counted twice, and so that you could also assess the income that was coming from outside. So if a business was selling products or services to the French Antarctic program or the Chinese Antarctic program, then it was counted and taken into account. So that studies you see here shows that in Hobart you have 947 full-time equivalent employment for in all Antarctic activities. About 3/4 of those people work in public institutions and 1/4 in private enterprise. You have 52 PhD students, 32 are international students coming from a range of other countries, 15 are Tasmanians, and only 5 from other Australian states. So what you see there is you have both a very strong international level of international collaboration, and then it's also a very big capacity building for Tasmania, where the students that are not from other countries are mostly Tasmanians. They don't come from Melbourne, Perth, or Sydney. And in terms of economic value of expenditure, about 229 million Australian dollars were spent on Antarctic activities, including 159 million, that's about 70%, that were spent within Tasmania. So 229 million Australian dollars, that's about 130 billion Chilean pesos. So what we are going to look at now is how Hobart rates against the 6 criteria we have set up for a gateway, what it means to be a gateway. So first criteria is being a point of transit to and from Antarctica. So what you see on the map is you have Hobart, and from Hobart you go mostly between those 2 blue arrows, which are links by ships to Dumont-d'Urville, the French station at the shortest distance, 2,720 kilometers, and to Mawson station, the Australian station that is the furthest, and to a range of other stations in between. So in all that zone, you have you have 3 Australian stations and 1 French station, which are always serviced out of Hobart. And then you also have Chinese and Russian stations that are serviced sometimes out of Hobart and sometimes directly from Russia or China through other ways. So who uses Hobart as a point of transit? So expeditions, you have the national Antarctic programs. Australia and France first are based in, well, they only leave from Hobart to go to their stations. And Australia also, of course, has the national Antarctic programs installed there. France national programs in Brittany, in Brest, in France, but they always come through Hobart to go to their station. Frequent users of Hobart, the Italian, the Russian, and the Chinese Antarctic program. And a special mention for China, because China has actually signed a memorandum of understanding with the Tasmanian Polar Network to use Hobart as a pool of expertise and a hub for services for their Antarctic expeditions. Even so, when they go from China to their Antarctic stations, their Antarctic station in East Antarctica, they don't need to come through Hobart. I mean, they can go around Australia, they can refuel in Christchurch, in Sydney, in Perth, where they want. They don't really have a need to come through Hobart. But they have progressively got to know Hobart and know they can do business in a quite simple way, and they can find the expertise they need. So they come through Hobart as a gateway of choice, not because they are really tied to Hobart in terms of their logistics. Occasional users, you have the USA through their marine science vessels and sometimes their planes. We'll see that later. South Korea, and then you have a range of marine science cruises from a range of countries. When they have a big expedition in the Southern Ocean, they quite often come back to Hobart. Tourism, there is not much tourism activity in Hobart to go to Antarctica just because of the distance. Going by ship to Antarctica from Hobart is minimum 5 days. So if you take tourists to Antarctica for a week, you will need to take them for nearly 3 weeks. 1 week to get there, 1 week along the coast, and 1 week to come back. So it's not really viable. But you still have a few trips, usually pretty specialized expeditions, mostly targeted to Australians who want to visit the Australian stations. Shipping, you see here the map of the port. It's a deep sea port with close to 3,000 meters of wharf, and about half of those, about 1,500 meters, can be used to berth very large ships. And you can see here on the top left, the Aurora Australis, the Australian icebreaker, the Astrolabe, the French icebreaker, and a large marine science vessel behind. And at the bottom, you can see the brand new Australian icebreaker, the Niunia. And you can see there that the Antarctic ships are really very close to the port and to the city. You can see those ships when they are in port from about anywhere in town, really. Getting in and out of Hobart, you see a map there. The way going out to the Southern Ocean is very straightforward. You have only about 5 nautical miles when you are required to be under pilotage. And there are some exemptions. So, for example, the French Antarctic vessel L'Astrolabe, their officers come here so often that, they have been trained, and most of them can now go into port without a pilot. And in terms of numbers, it's not a huge amount. It's 10 to 20 rotations a year. So you usually count about 5 rotations for the Australian Antarctic program and 5 rotations for the French Antarctic program. The ships doing usually really large trip going to a range of stations, resupplying them. They don't go up and down all the time. Air operations, Hobart has a very modern airport with a runway that has been recently extended to 2,727 meters. and it's just a quick 12 kilometers, 12 minutes drive to the port and to the city center. It can accommodate large aircraft, 747s. It usually doesn't because of the size of the traffic, but it is capable of really launching large planes with a lot of fuel going to long distance. There is just not really the market for passenger planes. So air operations to Antarctica, you have only two main lines, well, one main line, which is Hobart to the Australian station of Casey, 3,500 kilometers, which is done about with an Airbus A319 landing on a ice runway on the ice cap, usually about 11 rotations a year, and about 5 rotations by the Australian Air Force with a C-17 Globemaster, taking equipment, including sometimes quite heavy machinery. So it's nothing like the daily rotations you get out of Punta Arenas to King George Island, but it is quite new and is still quite useful. And there is another link that has been trialed several times over the last few years, which was the US Antarctic program using the Australian Airbus A319 to fly personnel directly from Hobart to McMurdo, 4,000 kilometers away. At the moment, they mostly fly in from Christchurch in Air Force planes, which are slower and less comfortable. So last important point about Hobart as a point of transit, you have very clear regulations and processes. So for customs, immigration and taxes, the Australian Antarctic Territory is considered to be outside of Australia. So you see the little map on the top left. The pink is the Australian Antarctic Territory, on which Australia claims sovereignty. But for customs, immigration and taxes, they do not consider the Australian Antarctic Territory as part of Australia, which means that if a foreign expedition comes to Hobart and start their expedition to Antarctica, even if their station is within the Australian Antarctic Territory, they do not pay taxes, so they do not pay the value-added tax. It's considered export. They have their passport stamped, which means that they can't be illegal when they come back. And all customs and quarantine are just like if they were leaving. So it's just standard control. You leave Hobart for Antarctica, even if you are going to the Australian Antarctic Territory, you are leaving Australia and you have all the standard processes involved with leaving the country. It's slightly different for West, which is managed by the Basel Convention. So the Australian Antarctic Territory is considered part of Australia, which means that the Australian Antarctic stations can bring back their waste to Australia. And if you go to other parts of Antarctica and you come back to Australia, there are some permits that are possible to bring back some waste, not the most toxic waste. So there are some prohibited waste you cannot bring back that you have to take back to your country. But you have protocols in place to make it as easy as possible for foreign expeditions to bring back their waste to Hobart. So criteria number 2, which was commitment to Antarctic values. So the main Antarctic values are cooperation, mostly international cooperation, science, and environmental protection. So in terms of cooperation, Hobart is the key place where Antarctic treaty policy is conducted, under the authority of the central government in Canberra, but most of the work is done in Hobart as part of the Australian Antarctic Division. The Tasmanian Polar Network is doing cooperation within Hobart, but also with all foreign expeditions that come through Hobart. There are a range of international students. They are encouraged to come to Hobart, and they usually help with setting up international cooperation projects in science afterwards when they go back to their institute in their countries. There are very frequent international meetings from all Antarctic forums, the Antarctic Treaty, the Kamala, and a range of scientific initiatives. And there is strong support for all international expeditions, the ones that are always coming to Hobart and the ones that may come at various times. There is a strong commitment to make it as easy as possible for them. The second value, science. Well, there's a very large amount of Antarctic science conducted in Hobart through the Australian Antarctic Division, which manages the program, the logistics, but also has a lot of scientists. You have the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies at the University of Tasmania, the Bureau of Meteorology, which is a national agency looking at meteorology, which has its Antarctic headquarters in Hobart, and where most of the meteorological research to do with Antarctica and the Southern Ocean is done. We have talked about again before the Southern Ocean Observing System, and we had this recent Antarctic Gateway partnership, which really supported and increased Hobart's scientific capabilities. The third criteria, environmental protection. Most of the work on environmental policy for the Antarctic Treaty and the Australian Antarctic Territory in particular are done in Hobart through the Australian Antarctic Division. There is a lot of environmental research conducted at the university as well. Tasmania having a very strong tradition of environmental protection in about Tasmania and the Southern Ocean, and then by extension Antarctica. We have Kamala, the conservation of Antarctic marine living resources, and ACAP, the Secretariat for the Conservation of Albatrosses and Petrels. Third criteria, connection with Antarctica. So the local population is well aware of Antarctic connections, all of the historic connections, the geological and connection, for example, with the Notophagus, like in Magallanes. Both Tasmania and Magallanes have the Notophagus, which was a species coming from Antarctica. Everyone knows someone that is involved in Antarctic affairs, and nearly everybody has a friend, colleague, family member that goes to Antarctica or that's been to Antarctica. The ships and the institutions are well visible. There are quite a few of them on the wharf. You can see the ships coming in and out. Many people can see it from their houses when the ships go up the channel. You can see them when you walk on the wharf or when you drive in the streets of Hobart City Centre. And Antarctica is always prominent in local news. Of course, sometimes a bit too much. You would think, reading the local press, that Tasmania is controlling and leading Antarctica and the only ones doing work in Antarctica, as often happened with the local press. But it means everybody is always well aware that a lot of Antarctic work is done out of Hobart, and there is a strong connection. criteria number 4, a gateway is a keystone of the National Antarctic Strategy. And you just have to see one element, one of the 5 key elements of the current Antarctic strategy from the Australian government. That's not Tasmania, that's the whole of Australia government. And that key element is build Tasmania's status as the premier East Antarctic gateway for science and operation. And as part of that, 2 important aspects are: 1, try to continue to promote streamlined regulatory and approval processes. So going through Hobart has to be as easy as possible for expeditions, and in particular for foreign expeditions. And 2, to try to support priority proposals with industry, and that mostly means identifying key areas of blockages and growth. So blockages, there was a fear that the airport may not be large enough to have those intercontinental links to Antarctica, and there was funding to extend the runway, and there was a worry that the wharf was not going to be sufficient, mostly wharf support sheds, and there was funding to support that as well, so for infrastructure. And they tend to try to identify also areas of growth, technologies that could bring exports, and trying to work with industry to develop those areas. Criteria number 5, the gateway must be well coordinated locally. So that is done mostly through the Tasmanian Polar Network. So I was involved with the Tasmanian Polar Network right from the start, and I was one of its deputy chairman for quite a few years. So the Tasmanian Polar Network is an alliance of public agencies on one side, about 15 of them, which covers science, policy, government agencies, port and airport authorities. And on the other side, private enterprise, about 50 members, and with a range of expertise. You have a lot of logistics and infrastructure, people who organize expeditions, who look after ships when they are in port, refuel the ships, people who help build buildings in the stations in Antarctica, machinery, in particular, big traverse equipment. There is not much traverse work happening in the Antarctic Peninsula, but there is quite a bit in East Antarctica. And Tasmania has been doing a lot of work on developing sleds and tractors for efficient, fast traverses. And they export some of these equipment to other countries that don't even use Hobart as a port of call. There is a range of scientific equipment and services, so measuring equipment, and consulting. So you have a range of consulting, from environmental work, environmental impact assessment, how to conduct expedition, how to process data, a bit of everything. So the Tasmanian Polar Network, with all those members, it is coordinated by the state government, who is basically ensuring that it works well and in a balanced way between public and private organizations. The big idea right from the start, and which has worked pretty well, is that all those actors know and trust each other. So if someone has a problem, if if I'm a consultant and the South Korean Antarctic program calls me and said, well, can you help me to come through Hobart? And how will that go with finding that kind of equipment and with having the permits to get my equipment in and out? Well, as a member of the Tasmanian Polar Network, I knew everybody, including the government agencies that had the keys to all those decisions, and I could go and talk to them and solve the problem pretty quickly. So the Tasmanian Polar Network makes it quite easy for the Antarctic communities to find solutions collectively and quickly. And there is a single point of contact. So it's clear there is a phone number and an email address managed by the state government. Anybody who wants to reach the Antarctic community in Hobart just has to send a message to that address and it will be redirected to the right persons and responded to, which is the main reason why, for example, China has signed that memorandum of understanding with Tasmania. There is a simple process, and there will always be someone to respond, and you will know that if the people you have been talking to cannot respond to your particular problem you are having this week, well, they will know someone else who will be able to help. So finally, the sixth criteria for a true Antarctic gateway: global reach and reputation. So global reach, Hobart looks actively internationally for partners in science projects and for students. Hobart actively supports the installation of international Antarctic secretariats and has been quite successful at it, which means that a lot more people are coming in for meetings, but also know what Hobart is doing. And when they ask their secretariat to help them with something, the secretariat quite often will respond to their needs because they can also call on the other members of the local community, and that is known. So that those raise the reputation of Hobart as a gateway. And Hobart actively tries to find solutions for Antarctic expeditions and even for expeditions that are not tied to Hobart. So even for the expeditions that do not have absolutely to come through Hobart, we can find solutions quite easily. And so the idea is to make it a gateway of choice, not a gateway of obligation. I'm not going through Hobart because it's my only option, because it's my shortest or cheapest. I go through Hobart because I choose it, because it's good for me. Global reputation. Antarctic and Southern Ocean science is so prominent in Hobart that everybody in the Antarctic and Southern Ocean science community in the world knows about Hobart and what its institutions are doing. Same thing for environmental management and policy. Sometimes some people would say it's nearly too much. Sometimes you have too much of Tasmanian input in some discussions. Antarctic treaty policy, most of the Antarctic treaty policy for Australia is done in Hobart. Mapping and data management. The Australian Antarctic Division has a very strong mapping component and data management, which serves data and maps used by a range of other countries for their work. We have seen it, a lot of logistics, products and services provided by the local industry, and a strong focus on facilitating cooperation. And so both internal cooperation and cooperation with other countries. So in conclusion, we are going to review quickly the key strengths of Hobart as a gateway, the key benefits it brings, and have a quick think about possible future evolution. So key strengths. Well, Hobart has both public and industry support. And when we say public support, it is national government and state government. And within both of those, it is all the main parties. So it's not one party that supports it and the other doesn't, which means that the next election, everything will stop. All parties, all the three main parties in Australia support Hobart as a gateway and the development of Antarctic activity. There is a very diverse and committed community in Hobart with science, government policy and industry, and all very committed to Antarctica and to its values. One important thing is the size of the city as well. So Hobart is large enough to have good facilities and to attract international reputed scientists, but it is small enough so that the Antarctic activity is sizable. If that was within Melbourne, Sydney or Perth, that would be so small in terms of local economic activity that it wouldn't really be seen and it wouldn't become a pride of the city. So the finding the right size city is important. We have so strong historical and environmental links between Hobart and Antarctica. We have, and that's important to attract other expeditions, clear, stable regulations and processes. The laws don't change very often. The interpretation of the law doesn't change very often. And you have clear protocols in place. There are documents explaining how you can go through Hobart, what to do with customs, what to do with quarantine, and you find people who know how to do that for you as well. There is a very effective coordination through the Tasmanian Polar Network and a single point of contact. So key benefits, well, locally for Hobart and Tasmania, it has a significant economic and social impact. It has a lot of reputation. So Hobart is on the world map because of the Antarctic Gateway and a sense of pride. So you are not a small city at the bottom of the earth that everybody laughs about. You are a pretty, good city recognized internationally, and you can be proud of your city and what it does. Nationally, it helps Australia having a good reputation and influence in the treaty system. Having a gateway that functions so well is supporting the Australian strategy of influence in the treaty system. It wouldn't work as well if people were all in small different places and not talking to each other. And internationally, of course, well, it strengthened the Antarctic treaty system by supporting Antarctica. So it's not just supporting the local economy and the Australian Antarctic territory. It is supporting the Antarctic treaty system as a whole and Antarctica as a continent. So to finish, future evolution. Well, this is just a personal perspective mostly. I think if I was still in Hobart, I would try to push Hobart to go to, and some of those things might be applicable to other gateways. Trying new forms of public-private partnerships. There are a lot of experiments done in the world at the moment with different ways of having public-private partnerships that are more egalitarian and work for both ways. So try to use some of those experiments to see how the local network could be organized differently and hopefully more effectively. With the rise of IT services, which are used in everything from managing operations, managing data, processing scientific results, I would see possibility of setting up some IT services toolbox that could at the same time showcase the expertise of the local IT industry and the IT universities, departments, and possibly export some of those as well, since they are really easy to export. You don't need to have to come through Hobart to buy unused IT services that you can just download from far away. Setting up turnkey expeditions. So if a university in a country doesn't have an established Antarctic programs, wanted to organize the scientific expeditions, find a way to have the local community getting together to offer turnkey expeditions, as I believe Punta Arenas is doing already. And the last one is pooling of infrastructure. See how the local the national Antarctic programs who use the gateway could work better and with the local community and with others to see how they could make a better use of their ships, aircraft, and station space and facilities to work with other countries who may use some of that. So that's already done at international level in other forums, but I believe that there could be ways of increasing that with the gateways working with those institutions. And anything else that could come across, I hope that that gave you a few ideas. So that was my perspective on building an Antarctic gateway from my experience with being part of building Hobart as a gateway in the 90s and the year 2000s. And I'll be happy to talk to you more about it, answer questions if we find an easy way to do it remotely or in writing. I hope that'll give you some good ideas and that we can keep working on it. Thank you.
Mi nombre es José Retamales y llevo ligado al tema antártico desde Punta Arenas por un buen tiempo, más de 30 años. Primero desde la Universidad de Magallanes, luego participé en la creación de un centro antártico en la propia universidad y finalmente el gobierno de Chile tuvo la amabilidad de distinguirme con nombrándome el director del Instituto Antártico Chileno desde el 2003 al 2017, casi 14 años. Así que he tenido la suerte de ser un testigo, un actor de lo que ha ocurrido en Punta Arenas principalmente, en menor medida en Puerto Williams, con la actividad antártica que fluye a través de estas ciudades hacia sus actividades principales en el continente antártico, particularmente en lo que llamamos la Tierra de O'Higgins, la península antártica, las islas Shetland del sur, desde la isla Elefantes hasta la Bahía Margarita, podríamos decir, principalmente en el lado oeste de la península antártica y algo en el lado oeste. La actividad antártica en estos 30 años ha crecido de manera notable. Voy a mostrar en las figuras que ustedes van a ver parte de ese desarrollo y como van a ver, puedo decir con alegría de que la ciudad y sus empresas han sabido responder a los desafíos que se han ido presentando en el tiempo. Así pues, en este año 2021 desarrollamos, como dije, bajo el auspicio de esta organización gubernamental chilena que se llama Corfo, desarrollamos un programa de asociatividad de empresas dedicadas a la logística, principalmente a la logística y al turismo antártico aquí en la ciudad, empresas chilenas. La región de Magallanes y de la Antártica chilena, como es su nombre completo, ha estado vinculada desde su creación a la exploración, al desarrollo y a la proyección geoestratégica, política, social y cultural de la Antártica. Quisiera primero relatar algo de la historia inicial del involucramiento de Chile en el tema antártico, que no es muy distinto a lo que pueden mostrar Australia, Nueva Zelanda, Argentina o Sudáfrica. Las primeras actividades del hombre en la Antártica fueron económicas, a comienzos del siglo XIX, asociadas principalmente a la caza de pinípedos. 1820, bajo el gobierno de Bernardo O'Higgins en Chile, numerosas naves se desplazaron, principalmente desde Valparaíso. Punta Arenas todavía no había sido creada como ciudad. En 1820 entonces el Livonia, el John, el Minstrel, el Lady Francis fueron algunos de los bergantines que, zarpando desde Valparaíso, se dirigieron hacia las islas Shetland del sur, en el lado oeste de la península antártica. La mayor hazaña de esa época primera correspondió al capitán Andrew McFarlane, un escocés que llega a Valparaíso en un bergantín, el Dragon, que aquí se vende, lo compran personas que invirtieron en Valparaíso, compran el Dragon y pasa a llamarse Dragón de Valparaíso. Y en ese buque el capitán Andrew McFarlane, que también fue teniente de la Armada de Chile porque colaboró en esos tiempos con episodios que tenían que ver con la liberación de Sudamérica de España. Es él el primero, tal vez, en descubrir la isla de Decepción y abordar la costa virgen de la península antártica. Es por ello que, como vemos en pantalla, ¿no es cierto?, hay un estrecho, el estrecho McFarlane, que lleva su nombre. Hay una placa conmemorativa que fue erigida entre los gobiernos de Chile y de Gran Bretaña por la nacionalidad que tenía Andrés McFarlane. Hay una ensenada que lleva el nombre del buque, del Dragón, y esto está entre la isla Greenwich y la isla Livingston, como digo, se ve en el mapa. Esa actividad antártica primera revive más tarde ya en Punta Arenas, habiendo sido creada esta ciudad en 1843, Chile llega a Magallanes. Revive entonces en Punta Arenas, que es en el momento el centro de la actividad económica austral, y en particular en la década de 1870 se expande en sucesivas etapas que llevarán primero a pescadores y cazadores chilenos a las Islas Elefantes en los años 80 y a las Shetland del Sur una década más tarde. Es así como a comienzos del siglo XX, Punta Arenas atendía expediciones antárticas propias, principalmente de la Sociedad Ballenera de Magallanes, entre 1906 a 1916, y las expediciones europeas, como la belga de Gerlache, las británicas de Scott y Shackleton, la sueca de Nordenskjöld, la francesa de Charcot y otras. Notable es la cantidad de barcos que la Sociedad Ballenera de Magallanes movilizó en la Antártica hace más de 110, 115 años. Como se ve en pantalla, en que hay dos buques, el velero Cornelia Jacoba y el cazador Almirante Montt, anclados en la isla de Decepción en 1908. La presencia de estos barcos tuvo un registro en el diario de viajes del Pourquoi Pas. El Pourquoi Pas era el buque que usaba el explorador francés Jean-Baptiste Charcot, que describe en su diario su sorpresa al encontrar en el cráter de la isla de Decepción, un 22 de diciembre de 1908, a una verdadera escuadrilla, así lo describe, de buques de Magallanes, instalados como si estuvieran en un centro industrial. En el vapor de mayor tamaño, de nombre Gobernador Bories, conoce al comandante de la escuadrilla, noruego, después nacionalizado chileno, de nombre Adolf Amandus Andresen, a quien entrega correspondencia de Punta Arenas, recibe correcciones de sus propias cartas náuticas y se asombra al ver a bordo a la señora Andresen, como él escribe en su diario, probablemente la primera y única mujer que jamás ha venido a la Antártica. Es impresionante entonces, como ustedes pueden ver, la cantidad de buques que se movía esta Sociedad Ballenera de Magallanes en ese tiempo, que hoy día Chile no mueve tantos buques como en esa época. Sin embargo, hoy Punta Arenas atiende muchos programas antárticos nacionales. De hecho, el doble que Ciudad del Cabo, que es la segunda ciudad en el número de programas antárticos nacionales que atiende. Esta hegemonía de Chile en la atención de programas antárticos nacionales la convierte en la mayor anfitriona de la ciencia y la logística en el mundo austral. Se han generado, principalmente en Punta Arenas, capacidades operativas, infraestructura, servicios que permiten recibir cada año de 1.300 a 2.200 científicos y logísticos de 21 o 22 programas antárticos nacionales, desde los rincones más apartados de la Tierra, en China, en Corea, en Japón. Vienen estos programas antárticos nacionales muchas veces en avión a Punta Arenas y aquí se dirigen a la Antártica, pero también se atienden del orden de 4.500 turistas de un esquema que voy a explicar un poco más adelante, que se llama el aerocrucero antártico, un invento nacional, un invento regional, podríamos decir, porque fue una empresa, Antártica 21, miembro de esta asociación de empresas antárticas que hemos denominado APAL, un amigo, un compañero, fue la primera empresa que inauguró este servicio de aerocruceros a la Antártica. Así pues, como dije, esta participación de empresas regionales ha sido clave para alcanzar esta hegemonía antártica de nuestro país en cuanto al tránsito entre un continente y la Antártica. La gran mayoría de estos visitantes, científicos, logísticos, turistas, vienen de países de climas cálidos y buscan en esta región la asistencia que necesitan, se movilizan, principalmente con aerovías DAP o Antártica 21 a la isla Rey Jorge, contratan servicios de agencias navieras, retiran ropa y pertrechos que los esperan en Punta Arenas, adquieren en suma aquí, en esta región austral de Chile, buena parte de los insumos que necesitan para sus expediciones. Esto se ha logrado gracias a la administración de buenas prácticas de las empresas regionales, que ha consolidado las ventajas comparativas de la región, una región que tuvo un nacimiento cosmopolita, una región a la que vinieron ciudadanos de muchos lugares del mundo, no solo de Chile, a formar esta ciudad al alero del estrecho de Magallanes. Y son estas empresas las que han contribuido a implementar en forma efectiva y segura el sistema del Tratado Antártico, con sus principios y valores fundamentales. Profundizar en este camino tiene oportunidades y amenazas. Para robustecer lo logrado, para continuar creciendo, Chile necesita comprender las corrientes de actitud mundial hacia la Antártica. Necesitamos entender, dibujar nuestras propias prioridades y resolver las deficiencias que hubieren, en un esfuerzo que, como mostró primero Antoine Guichard en el caso de Hobart, debe ser público-privado. La gráfica muestra cómo la preocupación por el medio ambiente hoy domina el interés de muchos países. El crecimiento de los países preocupados por el medio ambiente, que vemos en la curva verde en la figura, la curva del medio, ¿no es cierto? Vemos un crecimiento constante. Supera al crecimiento de los países adherentes del tratado, la curva roja arriba, ¿no es cierto?, que ha permanecido relativamente, ha permanecido quieta desde la última década, y sobre todo de los países consultivos, que ha estado estancado por ya 30 años. Los países consultivos que están en color azul en la parte inferior derecha de la pantalla, ¿no es cierto? Esos países consultivos son aquellos que tienen voz y derecho a veto en las reuniones consultivas del Tratado Antártico. Los demás países que se muestran arriba a la izquierda en pantalla son los países adherentes, que junto a los consultivos hoy día suman 54, pero de estos 54 países, muchos de ellos se inscribieron, se hicieron adherentes en su oportunidad del Tratado Antártico por razones históricas, por razones políticas, pero no llevan en la práctica no conducen una actividad científica en la Antártica. Aquellos que lo hacen son del orden de 39, 40, y de esos 39, como dije antes, ¿no es cierto?, del orden de 20 a 22 usan Punta Arenas como su puerta de entrada. Pero es importante notar de que los países consultivos, vale decir el interés político por participar en la administración de la Antártica, no ha crecido en largo tiempo, ¿no es cierto? Desde el año 1990 hasta hoy día, solamente 3 países se han sumado al grupo de países consultivos. 3 países en 30 años. Así que, por lo tanto, se ve que no hay un gran interés por participar en la administración del continente. El número de adherentes también se ha crecido en el tiempo, pero nunca tanto como el crecimiento de los países que han adherido al protocolo de protección del medio ambiente antártico, que son estos 42 que se muestran ahí en pantalla, ¿no es cierto?, que son aproximadamente todos los países que participan de alguna medida, en alguna manera, en la actividad científica de la Antártica. Como dije, 39, 40 participan en esto y tenemos 42 que han firmado el protocolo de medio ambiente, lo que significa hacer un trámite político en cada país, ¿no es cierto? En muchos casos son aprobados por el Senado de las respectivas naciones y por el Ejecutivo finalmente para adherir, para firmar este protocolo de protección al medio ambiente antártico. Así que países incluso que son muy pequeños, como el caso de Mónaco, o que tienen relativamente una baja actividad en la Antártica, como el caso de Pakistán. Sin embargo, se han sumado al protocolo del medio ambiente. ¿Qué nos dice esto? Nos dice que esa debe ser una preocupación de quienes prestamos servicios antárticos, ¿cierto? Si el mundo está preocupado del medio ambiente, nosotros debemos, con mayor razón, preocuparnos de ello. De esta manera, el concepto de ciudad puerta de entrada de los años 60, que hemos mantenido por largo tiempo, creo que debe crecer hacia lo que indica nuestro Estatuto Antártico de reciente promulgación, la Ley 21.255, que dice en su artículo 1, inciso 3, promover la protección y el cuidado del medio ambiente antártico y sus ecosistemas dependientes y asociados, así como su condición de reserva natural, dedicada a la paz y a la investigación científica, a través del reforzamiento y profundización del sistema del Tratado Antártico. La misma ley, en su inciso 4, artículo 1, indica que Chile debe potenciar y regular sus actividades antárticas, incrementando su calidad de prestador de servicios operativos, logísticos, tecnológicos y científicos antárticos, e incentivando el desarrollo del país ligado a las actividades antárticas, estatales y no estatales. Finalmente, la ley, en su inciso 5 del artículo 1, indica fomentar la actividad antártica de Chile, promoviendo el desarrollo social y económico de la región de Magallanes y Antártica chilena. Esta ley 21.255 fue promulgada hace muy poco, un poco más de un año, en agosto, septiembre, entrando en vigencia en octubre, noviembre del año 2020. Así que está cambiando el escenario antártico, y de ello da cuenta también un proyecto financiado por una beca del Australian Research Council Linkage Grant, una beca que tuvo la participación de investigadores de Australia, de Chile y de Nueva Zelanda. Fue conducido por el profesor de la Universidad de Western Sydney, Juan Francisco Salazar, chileno, y que postula precisamente que la región antártica enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes hoy, que las 5 ciudades puertas de entrada que vemos en pantalla, Ushuaia, Ciudad del Cabo, Hobart, Christchurch y Punta Arenas, están íntimamente conectadas a su respectivo sur austral de muchas maneras, históricas, culturales, políticas, afectivas, como las que mencionamos al comienzo de esta presentación en el caso de Punta Arenas. Esta conexión excede la función de transporte y de logística. Es necesario, indica en su reporte final el proyecto, robustecer los vínculos existentes para transitar hacia el concepto de ciudades custodias, de ciudades protectoras de Antártica, del medio ambiente en particular. En ese camino, el Centro Antártico Internacional de Punta Arenas, que una recreación del cual vemos en pantalla, ¿no es cierto? Y también las facilidades portuarias que se van anunciado para Puerto Williams serán hitos relevantes en el camino hacia antartizar nuestras ciudades. La desconocida vida submarina de la Antártica se va a poder observar en acuarios especiales construidos en el Centro Antártico Internacional. La recreación de un bosque del pasado de ese continente son elementos que nos permitirán a los ciudadanos de esta región reflexionar, y también a quienes nos visitan, reflexionar sobre los secretos que esconden esos hielos milenarios y la necesidad que tenemos de protegerlos. Otro hito importante, reciente, es la creación de la Fundación Antártica 21. Un hito que muestra el interés y compromiso del mundo privado con la educación, la cultura, el conocimiento, la conservación y la cooperación en la Antártica. Esta Fundación Antártica 21 y la red de observatorios de cambio climático, que también ha sido anunciada hace poco tiempo, también nos ayudará a visualizarnos en el imaginario colectivo, creando valor, mostrándonos como un país que se inserta y contribuye a la comunidad antártica internacional. Como muestra la siguiente lámina, para el caso de aviones IATO, esto es la organización internacional de los operadores de turismo antártico, la región de Magallanes y de la Antártica chilena es la principal ruta de ingreso aéreo del mundo a la Antártica. Como vemos, la cantidad de aviones, en este caso de 2018, de esa temporada, 2018-2019, que volaron hacia la Antártica en vuelos de ida y retorno, fueron nada menos que 155, lo cual supera con creces el movimiento aéreo que se realiza en el caso de los aviones de la IATO en Cape Town, en Ciudad del Cabo, que es el otro ejemplo que se muestra allí, que alcanza 27. Así que tenemos un liderazgo en el caso del movimiento aéreo, sin duda, ¿no es cierto? A esto se suman los aviones de las Fuerzas Armadas de diferentes países que contribuyen a la logística de esos países. En el caso de Punta Arenas, Brasil, Uruguay, en algunas ocasiones Perú, ¿no es cierto? Y por supuesto los aviones chilenos también vuelan a la Antártica desde Punta Arenas. Aprovechando que Chile tiene el aeródromo Rodolfo March en la base Frey y una pista de aterrizaje en el glaciar Unión al interior de la Antártica. Sin embargo, la región austral chilena no es una puerta de entrada marítima al continente blanco. ¿Por qué no lo es? Como se ve en los mapas en pantalla, ¿no es cierto? Hay un mayor tiempo y costo de navegación al sur desde Punta Arenas, porque nuestras regulaciones marítimas obligan a navegar el canal Beagle, como se observa, obligan a navegar de oeste a este, o a circunnavegar Tierra del Fuego por el Atlántico, ¿no es cierto?, para recién allí dirigirse hacia el sur. Esto hace que la ciudad de Punta Arenas esté fuera de la competencia del turismo internacional a la Antártica. Punta Arenas requiere una nueva ruta, una ruta necesaria para convertir a Punta Arenas, para permitir que desde Punta Arenas zarpen buques de turismo que son aquellos que van y vienen hacia la península antártica en cruceros de 10 a 12 días, ¿no es cierto?, en una temporada que dura aproximadamente 90 días, 3 meses. Cruceros de 10 a 12 días significa que se hacen hoy día desde Ushuaia del orden de 10 a 11 cruceros por temporada. Esos cruceros no van a venir a Punta Arenas. Podrían ir a Puerto Williams, pero no van a venir a Punta Arenas porque hoy día navegar el Beagle o dar la vuelta por el Atlántico significa aproximadamente en ida y regreso 40 o más horas de navegación. Así que obviamente que eso deja afuera. Punta Arenas no es puerta de entrada marítima a la Antártica. Sin embargo, la empresa privada regional ha invertido en buques antárticos y lo que ha hecho es privilegiar el servicio aerocrucero para disminuir dicha desventaja. ¿Qué significa el servicio aerocrucero? Significa que los pasajeros, sean científicos o sean turistas, no navegan desde Punta Arenas a la Antártica, sino que los espera allá un buque y lo que hacen es volar desde Punta Arenas hacia la Antártica en avión, saltándose los 2 días, un día y medio, 2 días de navegación del mar de Drake para llegar a la isla Rey Jorge principalmente y ahí tomar el buque que los lleve a su destino final o al crucero de turismo que hayan planificado. Las naves de los programas antárticos nacionales al menos siguen, al menos en su viaje inaugural y en su viaje final mantiene como puerto a Punta Arenas. Pero si dichas naves deben navegar por reabastecimiento durante la temporada de Sudamérica, no lo hacen a menudo, lo harán una vez, quizás 2 veces nomás, no vienen a Punta Arenas, lo hacen a Ushuaia, dadas estas 40 horas menos de navegación que mencioné anteriormente. Los buques que ustedes ven en pantalla, el Betanzos a la izquierda arriba, el Lenga a la derecha, el Magellan Explorer, el buque de turismo de Antártica 21 en el fondo, muestran que la empresa regional ha invertido a pesar de estas dificultades que he mencionado. Las agencias marítimas son la vía de comunicación de los usuarios antárticos, indispensables para sus operaciones marítimas cuando van o vienen de la Antártica. Estas agencias entregan todo tipo de servicios de transporte, logística, estiva, prácticos, venta y arriendo de contenedores, bunkering y el equipamiento que necesitan los programas antárticos que a veces queda en Punta Arenas durante el invierno y lo vuelven a usar cuando regresan al siguiente año. En resumen, el desarrollo antártico que permite nuestra cercanía a dicho continente ha sido en torno a 3 industrias que podríamos llamar tradicionales: la pesca, el turismo y la logística. También la ciencia. La ciencia ha producido patentes para nuestro país, como también ha producido patentes para otros países en el mundo, y todas ellas representan importantes espacios para el crecimiento económico, científico, cultural y social de nuestra región austral, que, como he querido mostrar en esta presentación, nuestra región austral ha logrado un lugar especial en términos de competitividad mundial frente a sus pares en Argentina, Australia, Nueva Zelanda y Sudáfrica. En buena medida, gracias a las innovaciones e inversiones que han hecho las empresas locales que han creído durante estos últimos 30 años que era necesario invertir. A futuro nos esperan nuevos desafíos. Habrán nuevos desarrollos tecnológicos, los vivimos todos los días. Se podrían sumar otras industrias como servicios de conectividad, disponibilidad de data centers, procesamiento de datos, sensorización, el Internet de las cosas, desarrollo biotecnológico, entre otras. Pero cualquier evolución o incorporación de nuevos ámbitos en el desarrollo antártico debe cumplir siempre con el principio básico de resguardar, de proteger el medio ambiente del continente blanco. Gracias.
We are here today with 2 friends that have agreed to come to this conversation to show you a little bit of the many things that happen in Punta Arenas as a gateway. Karin Strand, to my right, she is in charge of Hurtigruten Operation, the Norwegian company operating tourism in Antarctica. And Donnie Young, to my left, He is the representative for the COPRI. COPRI is the Korean Polar Research Institute, a large institution, one of the largest in the world, doing science in Antarctica. They operate at the moment in 2 stations and with 1 icebreaker, and there are plans in the future to continue growing. So I thank you both for your time, and I would first like to ask you, Karin, could you tell us what are your duties in the world?
So, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. Very honored to be invited. And so my task is to, together with, I'm not alone, I'm part of a bigger team, but task is to find locations in the world where we can operate our expedition vessels. In addition to oversee the operations once we've decided to come to a location. And in this case, we have committed to Punta Arenas over a number of years. We came here first time in 2002. I was here then, and I've followed the entire development since then. So those 2 ships that are coming and going every 10 days or so, at the time now, we make sure that services that we are receiving in Punta Arenas is up to the standard we would like them to be, and also for us to be able to look through into the region of Punta Arenas and see if there's more we can utilize as services and goods and so forth out of the region. But it takes meticulous work. It's not done in a swift. You have to talk to people. You have to get to know the region and so forth. And that's what me and some of my colleagues are doing. But right now it's me here. Yeah.
And in a broader view, I understand that you are also participating in IATO, the International Association of Tour Operators.
Yes, so we've been member of IATO since 2002, and are now contributing with several of our colleagues into different committees in IATO, and we also have one of our my esteemed colleagues, Tudor Morgan, as part of the executive committee of IATO. So we dedicate time and resources to be active in IATO as well. Yes, it's a very important organization for our industry, and as a responsible operator, this is a must. It's a place you need to be and where you want to be.
I didn't say it yesterday in my talk, but IATO is the organization that represents the tourist industry in the Antarctic Treaty meetings. They are also advisors to the COMNAP, the Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs. So it is a very strong organization that takes a very important role. In fact, I would say they take care of their operation in a way that is agreeable to all parties in the treaty. So I've had the opportunity to attend several meetings of the Antarctic Treaty, and I've seen that how important it is when it comes to tourism to have an idea of what's going on. Of course, the world doesn't know much in the treaty about what's going on in tourism and the way it grows and the way it handles the issues. So there is some regulation there, of course, because the treaty is in charge of the administration of Antarctica. But all the details are left to IATO. So IATO is crucial, is very important in Antarctic affairs. And we also have today at Donny Young. We prefer to call him Tony because it's easier to remember. And thank you, Donny, for being here with us. Donny is the COPRI representative in Punta Arenas. And can you tell us, Donny, in a very broad aspect, what do you do and what COPRI does?
The COPRI sent me to the Punta Arenas, especially INACH. Maybe they don't know INACH. The INACH is Instituto Antarctic Chile. INACH. My mission is here. The first one is communicating with INACH because we need a lot of help here because we have in station in Antarctic, King Sejong Station, and every year over 100 researchers come here and visited King Sejong Station. So they need to find some researchers as a counterpartner in Chile. So usually INACH or other universities. So my mission is to find someone who's gonna appropriate researchers and connect them each other. And also, second mission is about logistics. So I'm gonna make some schedule for some requirement what they need. So send them to King Sejong Station, and if some emergency case happens here, I have to do something, and I have to react something. So that's why hopefully send dispatchers to Punta Arenas in INACH.
You also have a station in the north, is that right?
Yes, those station is in, we call it Dasan Station, is in Svalbard, as you know. Yes, Svalbard. The Svalbard is belong to the Norwegian territory. Yes. Norwegian territory. So the station is not ours. We just rent one building. So there is a science villages. So Norway government made a science village in Svalbard. So they rented with some buildings to all over the world countries. So that's why we.
Korea has been the Republic of Korea has been part of the treaty since the 80s. It's been a consultative parties since probably 1984, 86. So
maybe 1986.
Sorry, that's what I meant to say. 1986.
Yes. Yeah.
I learned yesterday that Korean is one of the 7 most difficult languages to learn for Spanish-speaking people because you have ways of speaking that are quite difficult for any, and that also that it has no relation whatsoever, the language, with surrounding countries. So it's a language in its own, a very ancient language.
Yeah, but the meaning of we usually following the Chinese letter. Yeah, but the pronunciation is low or high is different. But meaning is very similar with Chinese.
But you also have your own alphabet.
Yes, we have.
Well, it is not usual for Hurtigruten to use Punta Arenas in the way you are doing it this year? What is the reason for that?
That's true. You know, we have deployed one extra ship here, but we have been committed to Punta Arenas for quite a while. But this year, in particular, Punta Arenas singled itself out as a particularly gateway that were reliable in information and predictability from an operational point of view as early as Chile could start giving any answers to whether the country was opening up or not for the coming Antarctic season. But you're right. Punta Arenas is not the biggest Antarctic gateway for Antarctic expedition cruise tourism. That still lies in Ushuaia. But and this year we have more operators here because it's a very complicated year with COVID regulations, COVID measures that are in place, and Chile has made a very clean protocol, which at least for us in Hurtigruten was easy to decide when the choice came closer to having to take a decision to redeploy one of our vessels to Punta Arenas. The other one was already here and was supposed to be here from the very beginning, but the second vessel we took away from Ushuaia and onto Punta Arenas based on Punta Arenas being a more favorable choice this year.
Perhaps I should say that in regard to King Sejong Station, that please correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the important reasons for Copri to operate from Punta Arenas is that you have the airfield very close to King Sejong Station.
Right.
So your operation is mainly by air, flying. I've seen your vessel also in the port, but
Yeah.
it doesn't come very often, does it?
It's not open because the vessel is the only one icebreaker now. The icebreaker is very busy. So this time they have a research cruise near Ross Sea. Yeah. So it's not very open to come to Punta Arenas or King Sejong Station. So that's why we need the Chilean logistics, like freight station, the Air Force, airfield, and DAP, flight. So, we need the kinds of assets. But
I was reading that the freight station airfield is the busiest airfield in the whole of Antarctica, but by far. The number of flights every year there, in a normal year, say, they are over 160, 180 flights per year. In 3 months. So in 90 days, you have 180 flights. That means you have, in average, say, 2 flights per day, which is a lot more than the number of flights you get from Cape Town to Novolasarskaya, or to the Norwegian station in the South African sector, and also a lot more than what you get from Hobart or New Zealand or Christchurch to the Ross Sea. So that is really DAP. DAP is a part of the APAL association, and they're really something that I've said a couple of times is that we shouldn't have those good airline services here if it not were because of both of you, because tourism and science. They both use the same air. I should say probably that the Hurtigruten does mainly an operation that goes to Antarctica and comes back but there are other operations that do an air cruise operation, that they fly.
Correct.
And they do not come, the vessel doesn't come to South America
Often. It's true.
You have not considered that as an opportunity?
We have considered it, but we have also we've not acted upon that opportunity yet. I think we still we feel that our vessels are relatively good seagoing vessels, so that we've not gone into air cruise yet. We're also thinking about the collective footprint that every guest put behind themselves. And we have the ship and the consumption that goes on the ship. We have air just coming to South America, as we are sourcing most of our guests either from Europe or North America. So we are already talking about a relatively heavy footprint as it is. So that is part of the reason why we haven't sort of gone, because we could have developed it within, and maybe even used the time during COVID to think about ways of doing that. But it's you have to weigh your balls there in the air and thinking, okay, what is right? And as you said earlier about, or I think we did discuss this before we started the broadcasting, is environment is something that we have to think about when we also create our itineraries, when we create our voyages, and see what are we laying behind us. So, but I'm not saying that air cruise is out of the question. I'm just saying that we've sort of paused it. At least it's not in the forefront of our development.
I don't think it has been said in the previous two talks that we had in this webinar that the tourism industry, you correct me if I'm wrong, it could be divided in three segments, say. One, which is the most important one, is the vessels that go there and come back. So, and they do that, say, 9 to 11 times every season. A second segment is the air cruise that we have already said. It's a much smaller number of people, and of course it's limited also by the capacity of the airfield and of the port. And there is a third segment, which is the much larger vessels that do not disembark. They are not authorized by the treaty to disembark in Antarctica. So they don't even use Punta Arenas or Ushuaia. They usually navigate all the way up, down from Brazil or Argentina, all the way down to Antarctica, and they return back to Buenos Aires or other cities. How many tourists can you take in your vessels?
So our vessels can take a combination of up to 200 and two vessels that can take up to 500. And that's also what the treaty sets as the limit for where you can go on land in Antarctica. No one with a vessel with more than 500 can set foot on the continent.
So I understand that you are running 4 vessels there?
We're running 3.
3 vessels.
3 vessels. So one that takes, the one that is in today are 200, and then we have 2 vessels that takes 500. So we have 3 vessels in Antarctica.
What are the names of those vessels?
They have names after old Norwegian exploration ships or people. So one is called the Fram, and the Fram was the ship that took Roald Amundsen to the South Pole when he made it to the South Pole. And the other vessel is called Roald Amundsen, and the third vessel is called Fridtjof Nansen, which were all Arctic and Antarctic explorers back in the golden era.
I don't know if you are aware of Andresen. Andresen was very important in Chilean history because the Adolf Amandus Andresen organized a company the whaling company that operates from Punta Arenas from 1906 to 1916. And in fact, he was, before that, in 1897, he was also hunting whales in the Strait of Magellan. So there is quite a bit of history of Mr. Andresen.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's very interesting. I was reading, I bought in France, the journal of when somebody goes in a vessel, you write a
diary.
A diary. The diary of Jean-Baptiste Charcot. And when he arrived in 1908 to Deception Island, he was astonished to see that there were many vessels inside Deception Island that were whaling vessels. So he was called, he was a medical doctor, so he was called to the Gobernador Borges, that was the main vessel there, to look at the lady that was ill. And so, to his surprise, was Mr. Andresen's wife, Wilhelmina was the name, and she didn't feel very well. So he wrote in his diary that Mrs. Andersen was probably the first and only woman that had ever been in Antarctica in 1908. So to his surprise, at the time of the exploration of Antarctica, there was this company of whaling company operating there. In fact, they have been there for a long time, also before that, in sealing. So something that I'm saying this because nowadays, of course, it's very different, the world. But in 1820, already Antarctica, there were many vessels from many different nationalities. 1820, so 200 years ago, much earlier than the explorations that were done inside Antarctica. The economic aspects of Antarctica, say, related to hunting seals, but there was no oil at the time, so the animal oil was important. And we don't talk about that now, but we should have it in mind, because it's...
Absolutely, and it was a very important industry. I mean, when you look at also what happened to the subantarctic islands, even in South Georgia as well, all the whaling that have been conducted in this region in the early 1900s and also through the 1800s. But that knowledge about the continent that was built up at that time are more or less lost unless you have that's one diary that you can find from a sealer or a whaler that were doing it. But most of the knowledge about the continent at the time were compartmentalized because it was the grounds for the riches, meaning that they kept it more or less secret to themselves, because these were hunting grounds that they wanted to come back to every year or every season, or in order to utilize. So it was not meant for the broader audience. However, that's why when the bigger explorers came and they started to make notes of their exploits, and then we were starting to look at science during late 1800s, that's when this sort of became public knowledge. But there is a lot of knowledge from the early 1800s that people knew more about Antarctica than we will ever know they did, but it's lost.
Capri has been in Punta Arenas for over 35 years. Actually, King Sejong Station was opened, I think, 1986?
1988.
88?
Yes.
So since then, 34 years, 33 years you've been in,
Yes.
Capri has been in Punta Arenas.
Yeah.
You haven't been that long in Capri, but have you seen changes in Punta Arenas in the way you operate? Is it has gone worse, or is it improved in some way?
Yeah. I improved, absolutely. Yeah. 2013, when I was in Antarctica as a wintering members. Yeah, that times some of researchers, they took a vessel to get the King Sejong station from here. Some of them took a flight to the King Sejong station, freight station. So that time it's very hard to get there. Yeah, what kind of transportation? But now is we mainly use DAP flight. The ship is only for the logistic. Yeah, transporting the something to the King Sejong station, and also we have plant factory. That times the 1986, 1988, we couldn't get any vegetables at all. But now we have vegetable. We can cultivate vegetable in our buildings. We have a plant factory. It's very unusual. One of Korean company, they are specialized in plant cultivating, growing vegetables. They made special how to say. Anyway, we can cultivate vegetables by ourselves there. So it's very development of technology. Yeah. In Antarctica.
Yeah.
Thank you. I made earlier a quick summary of the advantages and disadvantages of having Punta Arenas as a gateway. And in a map, I showed that actually the authorized route to go to Antarctica from Punta Arenas means you have to navigate south, and when you get to the Drake Pass, you cannot go south, but you have to go again inland into the Beagle Channel and navigate from east to west to east. Something like 12 hours or 14 hours until you get to the eastern side of Navarino Island, and then to get down to Cape Horn. So that means, in comparison Punta Arenas with Puerto Williams or Punta Arenas with Ushuaia, that to navigate from Punta Arenas south, it means you have to have at least another 20, 22 hours navigation one way. For a vessel that comes from Antarctica to Punta Arenas, it means 20 more hours in the inland and then another 20 hours in when you go out and down to Antarctica. So those more than 40 hours plus the time you need to leave the pilots in before navigating the Drake. It means that I said earlier that we are not really competitive with respect to Ushuaia or Port Williams, which are very close anyway. So would you agree, Kari, with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And this is one of the drawbacks with Punta Arenas that makes Punta Arenas not the preferred choice of a gateway for Antarctic operators, and that we are having a large stem of the of operators going out of Ushuaia because of expensive pilotage and forced pilotage in an area where you do see other navigational routes that could have been used, but they're not accessible. And that again makes the choice from a financial point of view easy for many operators, and also not just from a financial point of view, but like you've been saying so very eloquently, it's the time. So when all the voyage designers and itinerary planners who are sitting around in the US and in Europe and planning 2-3 years ahead, because that's the time span these companies have, is first the cost and then the time. And the time then plays a role of how many trips can you make within a season. If you lose 2 days, like Punta Arenas at the current state does, an operator would think twice to say, okay, I will actually lose a full trip this season in turnover because I have to trek 22 hours each way extra instead of having an alternative. And that is what makes it.
I was looking at the map that another way of going south would be to navigate northeast to the Atlantic Sea and then to navigate south. That would avoid using the Beagle Channel, but I compared that distance with the distance, for instance, to go to the Falklands. And it's nearly the same. If you have to go all the way up to the Atlantic and down, then you can also use the Falklands. It's about the same distance. So definitely, I think that that's something we need to think about. And, but probably that is not something that worries the national Antarctic programs, because per season you probably go once south from Punta Arenas, and probably you come back only 1 or twice. But you don't have to come every 8-10 days here. You don't do that. So it's not that important, say, the distance.
Yeah, yes. Punta Arenas is directly way to go Antarctic, especially King George Island for us. Yeah, for me, I never been to the Ushuaia or Falkland, but I wanna see what kind of infrastructure they have. But I hear the Falkland or Ushuaia maybe is a comparative or with the Punta Arenas, but yeah, I'm not sure it's a good location or good infrastructure. Well, for corporate now, I think Punta Arenas is best way to get to King George Island. Yeah.
Well, it was very important at the time. The government asked me, when I was director of the Chilean Antarctic Institute, to take care of moving the institute from Santiago down to Punta Arenas. And that we did it actually copying Norway, because Norway did a very similar thing, moving the Norwegian Polar Institute from Oslo up to Tromsø.
Right.
And also Australia did it, moving to Hobart. So I was in the international arena at that time, attending the international treaty meetings. And everybody was surprised. I mean, that Chile would do that, because they know that Chile and Argentina are highly centralized countries. Even if Argentina is a federal republic, still it's a centralized country in many ways. So to move an institute, actually there was a lot of opposition from the people that work in INAH. They thought that we are going to the wild to be in Punta Arenas to work, and it hasn't been so. I mean, it has been much better, because here the INAH has the opportunity to talk to many other national Antarctic programs that did not have that opportunity by staying in Santiago. The national Antarctic programs, when they go to Antarctica, they don't want to spend a couple of days in Santiago. They want to go straight to Punta Arenas, and as soon as they can, to go south. So to move the Chilean Antarctic Institute down to Punta Arenas was a smart move. And but as we are saying, it's not enough, at least not for the tourist operation.
No.
Is it difficult to consider Puerto Williams as an alternative?
Absolutely not. If Puerto Williams would have the airfield and the hotel capacity which would match, and I would say a gradual change and increase, Puerto Williams would be the most perfect placed geographical location for as an Antarctic gateway for the expedition cruise industry. It would take off the pressure as well from a Ushuaia who has been growing gradually, but it's exponentially not the same growth on the pier locations and so forth. The airport is good. The airport has good capacity and can still take growth. But the harbor facilities are the big stopper in the Ushuaia operations. So if we could sort of share the load between Williams and Ushuaia from a geographical point of view, a cost point of view, those two would have the most prominent locations.
Something else that I just came to my mind. I was in Christchurch and in Hobart, and I saw there were fuel tanks in the port. So to load the fuel for a vessel in those locations should be far quicker than the way we do it here. Then we have to bring lorries, say 20-25 tons every lorry, and if you have to, I don't know how many tons of fuel you have in one vessel, but
350 cubic is a good average.
350 cubic meters. So that means say 20-25 per hour. That means you need several hours in the port just to load fuel.
6 hours is not unusual to use for fueling.
And it even works for scientific icebreakers, because they can take a lot more. They usually take 1,000 cubic meters, and that means a couple of days waiting. That is something that it will take time to build up in Puerto Williams, of course. So it's not easy to get to a good standard. How do you manage in King Sejong when you need fuel? How do you bring the fuel there?
We bring the fuel, Antarctic oil.
Yes?
Yeah, Antarctic oil is produced. Antarctic oil is produced in Punta Arenas. Right. And yeah, I don't know how many tons, I can estimate, but yeah, we bring the Antarctic oil by ship in Punta Arenas ship. We usually in this area ship. This season we needed to find the ships can capacity to bring Antarctic oil. Like this time is we use Lenga ship every other year.
The ultramar ship.
Yeah, ultra. Yeah, but it's very hard to find a ship because this season is very busy. So other country station, they also need a kinds of ship. So yeah, so these times we use 2 times Lenga ship. Because one time is for just normal shipping, but second time is Antarctic oil shipping. But last year, maybe every year, we bring the at the same time, just one time shipping. But this year, it 2 times. It's very difficult for us because we have to pay 2 times. Yeah.
So we need an oil tanker probably here.
Yeah.
Actually, it's surprising that we don't have it. It should be.
Should be, yeah.
Should be there. I as I was in INASH before, I know that the INASH budget per year is about. It varies because it gets extra money for science, but it varies between 6 to 10 million dollars per year. And I understand that the COPRI budget is about 20 times that amount of money. So I'm just saying it for the audience to realize that the Antarctic programs in the world are some of them are very big and invest a lot of money and efforts in doing science in Antarctica. How difficult it is to operate a station so far away from Korea and overwintering. What was your experience with overwintering?
It's a difficult thing for me. But I don't know, just missing family. and I enjoyed the wintering time life because in winter time Antarctica, if we have a good weather condition, we go outside and have a activity such as skiing or hiking or looking around the seal or penguins or like that, and also we visit neighborhood station. In Kinjuji Island there are many stations: Chile, Uruguay, Russia, and China and Argentina, and Poland also.
Poland,
Yes.
Brazil.
Yeah, Brazil.
Poland.
Yeah.
Poland. Yeah. Actually, you are here with your family, aren't you?
Yes.
You have 2 small kids.
Yeah.
How difficult it is for Spanish? I mean, the main thing.
But first child is daughter is 15 years. This year 16 years old. She already got the admission from British school. Before she came here, so she is doing very well. To learn the Spanish. But second child is 9 years old, but he doesn't like Spanish. So now I'm gonna push to learn Spanish. But anyway, my children is still adapting. It's new environment, new situation.
Of course.
Yes. Hopefully, they are getting better.
Yeah. Well, it's probably once they are in school they will learn Spanish very quickly.
Yes, I hope so. From next month.
From next month.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is anything else you would like to say, Karin?
I think I think this has been really enlightening and a discussion that I've drawn a lot of learning from, I have to say, and learning more about COPRI and what you're doing in Antarctica is because we are always passing, on our voyages, because we pass through King George Island on a regular basis and seeing the station, but not really knowing what is going on inside. So we always it's always this kind of fantasy, it's like what kind of exciting science is going on there, and we have our own science centers on board and science personnel, and we're constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate and know and learn and so forth. So I think this has been a very, very enlightening session here, and learning more about what you're doing, and also from your perspective here, Jose, and your experience. I think just that Punta Arenas is sort of underestimated as an Antarctic gateway, apart from being the major gateway for all the Antarctic programs. There's no one that compares to Punta Arenas in that, and because you've spent time and you've spent resources to build it well, I think that Punta Arenas will stay a very important Antarctic gateway. I think from a tourism point of view, from a ship perspective, we still have a way to go. But I think that this season have opened eyes also for other operators, because Chile was decisive, because they were clear. So more have been using, but I'm still thinking that we could do something from the Chilean side, either it's here or in Williams, to highlight and develop more and take Chile's share of Antarctic expedition cruise tourism.
Thank you, Karin. Would you like to say something else before?
Yeah, good. The reason why the COPRI send people to Punta Arenas, like me, or like my family, the Punta Arenas is, I think, Punta Arenas is an important part of research things for COPRI. So COPRI needs a Chilean infrastructure and Chilean people's help and Chilean researchers the knowledge or experience. So we need a Chile Punta Arenas infrastructure, people or anything.
You know that very soon, probably this month, the government will make the decision to build the International Antarctic Center. I think I will come back to you both to ask you, what would you like to see there? We have a plan, of course. Probably we have made that plan just between ourselves, and we haven't talked to you, to the main user. What do you think about these plans? So I thank you both very much for this time, and I will try not to bother you very much in the future, but probably I will write to you about the International Antarctic Center, because that is a very exciting opportunity. It's a $70 million expenditure, which is money that we would like to spend it well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Tony. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you. Thank you. For an honor.